Well, good morning. I'd like to welcome you to another installment of the Pastor's Heart series, a series that covers areas such as character development, integrity, generosity, encouragement, finding joy in marriage. We're basing this series on Psalm 78:72, where the psalmist writes about David, King David. He said, David shepherded the people with integrity of heart, and with skillful hands he led them. Much of ministry leadership development is built around the idea of developing skills and knowledge to lead, to pastor, to guide, to shepherd. But when you look back in the New Testament, Paul, in his qualifications for a pastor, for an elder, his description, a long list of descriptors, but he focuses on character. He does mention knowledge, he does mention skill, and they're extremely important, but the emphasis is on character. So this is another installment, and we have a very special guest today. Well, two guests. We have Neal and Christina Davidson. Neal is the pastor of Hope Chapel in Sterling, Massachusetts, and his wife Christina, she oversees the worship area of the church. And they have been married 41 years, and they've been in ministry together for 41 years. So a lot of experience. And they're going to be talking with us in two parts. They're going to be talking about uh, joy in marriage and ministry, how you can experience joy in both at the same time. And it's going to be a two-parter, as I said. The first one, they're going to talk about how to overcome the difficulties, stresses, and strains in marriage. And they'll be able to take us through from when they got married and at the same time were in ministry up through many years, and now they're empty nesters. So they have a wide scope of experience and practice and working and developing their marriage as well as ministry. And then our second part will be how to promote health, how to keep your marriage strong throughout the seasons of life. And again, a wide range of experience over many years. And I am looking forward to this conversation. Just a programming note: in May, one of our guests for our Pastor's Heart series will be Phil Waldrop from the Phil Waldrop Ministries, and Phil is a amazing friend of New England pastors, and he's going to be talking about how to cultivate generosity and encouragement in your life and in your ministry. I'm Robby Pitt. I am a coordinator with the Baptist Churches of New England and Pastoral Leadership Development. And I'm also a church planting pastor in Waterville, Vermont, Waterville Country Church. Again, I'd like to welcome you to the Pastor's Heart series, and I'd like to introduce you to Neal and Christina Davidson.
They serve together, not just husband and wife, but they both serve in their church. Neal's pastor and Christina worship director at their church, and they're going to tell you a lot more about that. But much of leadership development, pastoral leadership development, centers around the area of developing skill, and skill is essential, vital in leadership. But if you were to look at the qualifications of a leader in Timothy and Titus, Paul instructs in terms of ordaining and recognizing those who would lead the church. And if you were to play a little game with that and say, every time a description was given, a character or a quality was given, you would put a C for character, an S for skill, a V for vision, and a D for knowledge, or a K for knowledge. You would discover very quickly it's quite lopsided. Almost every quality relates to our character. And Jesus adamantly, adamantly talked over and over about what comes out of the heart. So I think this is really an essential part of leading. And that would be true in the first century, and it's certainly true in the 21st century. So I'd like you to welcome Neal and Christina Davidson. And this is going to be a two-part video cast, and they'll kind of set up where they're going today, and then we will have a second part to this. And I invite you to just take a seat and listen as they share with us together. I thought it would be great to have them both together and and share. Thanks, Neal. Thanks, Christina.
Great to be with you, Robby, and it's great to be able to have a chance just to kind of talk a little bit about marriage and ministry, because that's it's such a huge part of doing ministry well. Because the old adage is right: if you fail at home, you fail in ministry. And so I think we've been really blessed in our journey. We, as a part of talking about all of this, we really, we have an overwhelming sense that ministry has been good for our marriage. Doesn't mean it's been without its challenges, but it's been good for our marriage. And so just a little bit of background. So I'm a native of Massachusetts. Was born in Waltham, raised out in Sudbury. My parents were charter members of one of the first half dozen Southern Baptist churches planted here in New England. So I was grew up as a Southern Baptist in New England, which was a rarity in those days. And I think Dr. Curran used to tell me I was the first one who landed up in a pastorate who grew up in that kind of context. And
really?
Yeah, and and outside of 4 years at Southwestern, I've been in New England all of my life, through college and ministry. So got 3 siblings, and one's in Thailand, but the other 2 are right here in New England as well.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Robby, and just appreciate this opportunity. I am not a native New Englander, though I moved here from the Midwest when I was 13. It was very traumatic as a middle schooler, and we lived in Newton, right outside of Boston, and actually struggled to find an evangelical church, particularly from the Southern Baptist tradition, which we were accustomed or members before, in St. Louis. And so traveled 35 minutes to drive to First Baptist Sudbury, where Neal and I met in youth group. Sounds a little cliche, but we did. Yeah. And it was, and so my parents became quickly very involved, and I was a deacon's kid, and as well as Neal. And so we were watching adults in ministry from a very early age, as well as the pastor there, David and Carolyn Dean, he and his wife. Oh, yeah. We just could watch up close and observe. And little did we know that much of that time in a very vibrant youth ministry, just being in church with them, and just the closeness that came with the fellowship and the culture that they created was a real training ground for us, just from watching, but just incidentally seeing God at work, and wanting to and feeling that call, and being compelled to follow the Lord vocationally that way. So.
Yeah. So we've been married this July will be 41 years.
Wow.
And all 40 of those years.
A long time.
Yeah. all 40 of those years we've been in ministry. I like to joke, she stalked me for 7 years. She followed me to college and then followed me to Texas. So finally I had to relent and marry her. And we did that back in.
Such a lie.
So that's quite a legend there, quite a myth.
And we have 2 grown boys. Both of them are married. One lives in Virginia. The other one's in New Hampshire, and 2 little grand girls now. They're 3 and 2, and a lot of fun. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been in ministry really all of our marriage. We grew up at First Baptist Sudbury, and they were really good about letting the teens have a presence in the life of the church. And then when I went off to Bates College in Lewiston, Maine, the church up there, Thomas Memorial Baptist Church, one of our oldest Southern Baptist churches in Maine, they were really great about letting me experiment with ministry while I was considering a call to ministry, and which I, and I was there that I really felt like God was calling me into ministry. And then when I graduated, we transferred together to the Fort Worth area, where she went to the University of North Texas, and I went to Southwestern. It's really interesting. We went down there.
Music major at North Texas?
At University of North Texas.
Yeah. Oh, and that's a great music program.
Yeah. It was, I don't tell very many people this, but I was an organ major. And, but just through those churches and through Thomas Memorial and the church we were part of that Neal's about to talk about, I just learned so much about congregational worship and what that really means in the life of the ministry of the church. And talk about experimenting. lots of foils and failures along the way, but just enjoyed a lot of learning during that time.
Yeah. We got down and said, all right, we're going to visit all kinds of different churches because
there's all kinds.
There weren't very many to choose from in New England. Very first church we went to, we ended up joining the very next Sunday. And actually, then it was called Grace Temple Baptist Church. Now it's the Denton campus of the Village Church, the Village Church of Denton. So, and a month after we got married, I went on staff working with college students, and she went on as the organist. And then when we wrapped up seminary, came back, and it was planted down the South Shore in Hanover, Mass. Mm-hmm. Church called Fellowship Baptist, and we were there from 87 to 94, and that's where both of our boys were born. And while we were there, we bought land, built a building, and then rebuilt it after an arson fire. So it was a very busy 7 years while we were there.
I was working full time, and we had toddlers, and
And then from there, I was asked, still not sure exactly why, but I was asked to come serve on the staff of the Baptist churches in New England, which I did, and was full time with them from '94 until the early 2000s. And
what was your area of ministry?
Well, I started out
a lot of different things.
Yeah,
right?
My original title was Church Development Director, and then it became like church health stuff, and then it became kind of much more, overarching.
Architecture.
Had some others come on, a lot of little things, and then eventually I became the Associate Executive Director.
Okay.
And doing church planting and the other side, kind of working through all of that. And
I was also able to serve as a volunteer state music director, whatever that was, and join other state music directors who are full time with their respective conventions and around the United States, but. Again, that was just a great learning time, and just seeing what our convention had for resources for congregations. And so that was one way we were serving separately, but in parallel.
It was an interesting journey, because she was doing some of that, but really for the most part, I was gone somewhere almost every Sunday doing something. And she was the kind of like the worship coordinator at Church in Hudson. Grace Baptist in Hudson. Yeah. So so our ministries were really kind of separated there for 8 years in a lot of ways. And then in 2002, God led us to plant here at Hope, what's now called Hope Chapel. And
we lived in Sterling from that time.
And there had been a little Southern Baptist church here for 30 years, but it never really had become stable, never really averaged more than 20 people. Most of the years they averaged in the single digits, and they decided to close and asked us to start something in their place. And as we got there, it's been amazing. A lot of great stuff has happened, and we bought land, built a building, and now adding on again. I've had a chance to plant some churches, and there's it's just really been quite a joy as we go through. And, so, talking about marriage, I mean, and how does that really, where do you extract the joy in ministry and, for marriage and those kinds of things?
I like that word, extracting. That sounds very surgical. I don't know.
But it's I think about it, and this is the way we want to process it with our conversation with everybody is, there are certainly things that you need to do to build your marriage, those healthy moments where we need to eat right and exercise and keep our weight down and watch all that stuff and do the things that promote real health in our marriages.
Right.
I want to talk a lot more about that next time. But this time around, I mean, what's clear is that ministry will bring some stresses into your marriage.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus said, the rain's going to fall, the wind's going to blow, the river's going to rise, it's going to burst against your house. There are going to be hard times. And some of those are just general life dynamics. And sometimes those are things that are specifically related to marriage and the marriage and ministry, so just to give you some feel.
First, let me just interrupt too. That's such a great framing, and I really want to begin with, and I mentioned this in our previous introductory meeting with the three of us, Robby, and to end with this is that ministry together really can be good, and a lot of those tuning in or listening to this later may really feel in a place of discouragement, of loneliness, of what is this life I'm stuck with, and who is this person I'm doing this with? And it's not easy, but they're really, really on the whole, we've just been grateful for very positive experiences, and a lot of that's we've reacted or proacted. And so I just want to just make sure that there's people know there's hope in that, in the long view of ministry marriage.
Yeah, and so, looking at some of these things that create stress in marriage, and just so kind of people have a frame of reference, some of our examples of it, and then we want to talk about some of the things that really helped us through those journeys. Is sometimes they actually come from really good things. We moved back from Texas, moved to Rockland, Mass, started replanting this church. There had been a church there that had bought some land and grown to like 60 or 70, and it seemed to be at a very viable place. And the information about the land seemed to be not quite clear to everybody. And the next thing you know, the glass is half empty instead of half full, and it just kind of all fell apart. And there were a couple of wounded bodies that agreed to help restart something, and that's what we went to. My very first service in May of 1987, there were 16 of us there, and 8 of them were family, including us. Right? So there was 8 people meeting on Sunday night.
Came too. I'm not sure. But,
yeah, it was a lot. So, anyways, and but while we were there, not only did we buy land and built, but then we rebuilt, which is a marvelous experience to have, especially building it for the first time.
Following a very devastating event of the loss of that building.
Yeah, and then we had, and both of our boys were born there, so and Christina was working full time because the church really didn't have any resources to pay me. There wasn't any way for us to live there.
I think your starting salary was $16,000, and then I think that
was everything, health insurance.
I was making something similar, maybe just a couple thousand more, and so.
No, you were doing better than that. But anyways, it was just very busy with her working full time and taking care of the boys, and they were toddlers and infants and et cetera. Imageries that stand out in my mind. So, both of our boys were really good pastors' kids because they were born early in the week, Monday and Tuesday. And I remember specifically when Joshua, the oldest one, was born. I mean, that very next Sunday, Christina is back playing the piano and leading music because, you hear all these teams talk about next man up. Well, we didn't have anybody to up.
I mean, that's great, but I'm not sure we recommend that.
Yeah.
Maybe not the best boundary.
But it's really indicative of the stress you face, right?
Uh-huh.
Kind of idea. Or like when the boys were really little during Christmas Eve and they just wouldn't sit still. And so, I open with prayer and read a scripture, and I walk to the back of the sanctuary area. I take both boys out of her arms. She goes up, we do a couple, kids come back, and you're just going back and forth and et cetera. And there's just this picture of all this stuff that's going on, and you're trying to manage all of it, and all of it's good. You're getting a chance to serve. The kids are growing, they're healthy, whatever, but there's just a lot. And it comes at you very fast.
Well, and then especially as we transitioned and moved up to North Central Massachusetts, and Neal was working as a regional consultant, and a lot of times the boys would go with him, but we were still very separate. But when Hope Chapel started, there was a lot of stresses in terms of because you did everything, and if you're a church planter, you know what that's like, and there was a time, even in as the church was growing in the mid 2000s, that early between 2000 and 2010, I was working 3 part-time jobs, which added up to even over full time, and it was really kind of crazy. I was teaching piano lessons, working in a medical billing office, and then I was part-time on staff at the church as we began. And I don't know if I skipped over something.
No,
now,
but there's other seasons. Like when we came to serve at the Baptist churches in New England, that's when we moved to Sterling, and I jumped right back into ministry. Right, I mean, day one, I got lots of stuff to learn, lots of people to meet, lots of stuff to do. Christina's now kind of working remotely, wrapping up some of the stuff she was doing with this insurance company. And she's at home with 2 little boys, and we don't know anybody. It's the beginning of the summer, right? There's no school programs. There's none of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We were between churches. We were looking around, and I'm probably one of the few. I mean, as a state convention worker, I had a pastor tell me, we really don't want you to attend here, even though they were a part of our network. So,
Okay, sorry.
So we landed up going to the church in Hudson. That's where the family settled in. And,
Yeah.
but it was a very difficult time for Christina, kind of lonely, just the kids, not a lot of adult interaction, not a ministry of her own to pursue at the moment. And it was really kind of challenging in a lot of those kinds of areas. And
calling, and really where was God calling me specifically with the gifted? And I think that's a huge thing for ministry wives, finding their place, finding their calling, even still connected. And how do I stay married well to this?
And they confront a lot of expectations. We've had several pastors who've kind of come onto our staff or come and attended Hope Chapel and just kind of recovered from difficult moments and then have gone on. And I'll never forget one time we hired a guy to work with us in a particular role, did a marvelous job. And his wife came to me like second week after he was on staff. And she said, well, what are your expectations of me? And I was like,
what?
I was like, I said, I don't have any expectations of you except for just being a good member. But that was very, but her statement is very indicative of the pressure you face in marriage, sometimes in marriage.
Expectations, that's huge. And, not only, I think wives put them on themselves for whatever role model or mold that they think they need to adhere to or fit into. But also there's cultural expectations. And I appreciate within the church. And I appreciate that Neal from very, early on is not put that on me, or I just listened to a podcast recently, and I'm pretty sure this was way in the Deep South, that a pastor's wife, he had just come on staff pretty newly, and the elders or deacons handed her a book, a manual that was written with the things that she needed to do in the
manual for the pastor's wife.
Yeah, and she said, is this a volunteer role? And they said, absolutely. And she said, well, please let me volunteer then. So thankfully, I never experienced a lot of that. I think being in New England, that creates some more opportunities.
And there are lots of pieces. Again, the stresses and strains. As a church planter early on, I can remember, if we had high attendance of 40, you just go home and you're walking on cloud nines, and you're just feeling really good. And the next week you have 23, and you think, man, I'm the worst pastor or whatever. And these dynamics, and they all, it's hard not to bring that stuff home and work through all of that. And then, every once in a while, you're going to have difficult people, and
every once in a while,
I think sometimes church plants will drag those up, but really, those aren't as significant to me as when you've had people who are really close to you, people you've leaned on, people who were there, and then somehow or another you just feel abandoned by them, and those can be really, really hard moments to get through, because it takes a real relational toll on you, as well as just the time demands and other kinds of energies, and sometimes there's really no basis for it. Sometimes it's just a statement that was way misunderstood, or sometimes it's just the pressures in their own life are really starting to come out in a different direction, and they attack
on you.
And it's really kind of interesting stuff. So, and so one of the gifts I think that we've tried to learn on all the way along in our ministry, we've had people that were examples or mentors to us. Some of the relationships were much closer in terms of really mentoring, and others were more just examples. And I think that's one of the things we really need to grab onto. Christina mentioned already David and Carolyn Dean when they were at First Baptist Sudbury.
She just passed away, actually.
Yeah, and then they went down to New York City, and he served as a DOM there for many years, and we stayed in connection with them. He did both of my parents' funerals and whatnot. So, and then and then when we were in seminary, the church we served at, Terry Land and his wife Catherine, it wasn't so much a mentoring relationship, but it was just a great way to kind of watch how they handled everything, how they integrated family, how they protected some family and that kind of stuff.
We were newly married.
And he was about 15 years older than me. And it was really great to watch, and I learned a lot of things through that. And then, when I got to the BCNE, Dr. Lyle was there. He was the one who asked me to come and serve there. And there was just ways in which he really found a rhythm to make sure that he kept his wife Judy engaged, and she was a part and had relationships and et cetera. And you're just kind of watching all this stuff. And I think it's really, really important to have, people that are, that are in your orbit, that you trust, that are a real deal. Mm-hmm. And they can be an example, a mentor to you, if you will.
And I would say those things happen naturally, and just to encourage particularly young pastors and wives to keep their eyes open, to look for those people who God gifts you with those things and with those people, and to not only look, but even seek them out proactively. Uh-huh. And I've done that with some pastors' wives. I think, and I mentioned that a lot of our experiences really were really training grounds. We didn't realize it at the time, but particularly preparing us for a ministry at Hope Chapel, and which has really been kind of the 23 years, I guess. But I think just many meetings about worship planning with Mark K. Cuff. I just learned so much, and his wife Libby. Also, even just a mentor from afar. I've reached out to Gail McDonald. Some of you may know, former pastor's wife from Grace Chapel in Lexington. Gordon, and I just one year said, can I just email you? And she would get right back to me, and just was so encouraging, and then led to a couple of visits. So you have to kind of take action sometimes too, but also see who God is showing you.
Well, I think sometimes we think that we ought to, just because we have the Holy Spirit, we ought to know how to do it all and do it well. And I think there's ways in which we really need to be willing to learn. And marriage can be very personal. And, I do think we need to have people that we trust, that we can have conversations with. But, there's some things that we did along the way that really helped us with those stresses and strains, right? Again, so some of the strains are difficult moments. Like, I will tell you, when the church building burned down by arson, and we had to move off site, and the church went from like 120 to like 40, and those kinds of things. It was really, really hard.
And the spirit inside was a real great discouragement that turned in some angry business meetings and things like that.
It was just hard. A lot of pieces, and yet sometimes when it's really growing fast, like when we were building and when we built here and like now, I mean, there's lots and lots and lots of things you have to do. And even if you're not trying to do everything, there's still lots and lots of things you have to do, and it just creates a lot of energy drain, which can create stress. Mm-hmm. So,
and just another example that's much more current. Sorry,
go ahead.
But is that we've at first when we were talking about building an addition, I could just feel anxiety coming up inside me 8 months ago, and like, Lord, really, I thought we were going to be, retired or leaving, but I'm really, really just seeing God working, and how this is a new opportunity for us, even in this season of aging and multiplying next generation leaders, which is really what we've been about. But in the last 6 months, even though this has been an exciting venture and a prospect for kingdom growth, we've been part of probably, I think, 8 funerals, and the first of which, get emotional, but we have a bonus son and his wife, and they lost a baby, was stillborn, lost a heartbeat at 9 months. And so that was the first of several funerals that, and some we were close to, but so it was not only a time of growing pressure in terms of tasks that needed to be done in preparation for the building design, and I've been involved in the AVL part of it very heavily. These other things were happening, and loss, and needing to serve and minister to these families.
There's sacred,
sometimes our own personal loss, and
but they're sacred moments, but they're giving moments, right? They're ones that don't add in. So, so there's some things that we've done,
Can I ask you? I just want
yeah,
to.
go, yeah.
I really appreciated the whole thing about the mentors. Uh, you know, maybe an official mentor or the unofficial, the
Yeah,
example. I
organic.
mean, you both grew up with deacons as dads, and so you had an up front and up close view there from a kid's perspective or a
Yeah.
teenager's perspective at that time. Um, but now that you are both quite seasoned in terms of
Yeah.
longevity in ministry and marriage, um, uh, and I know that Hope Chapel has helped be a sending church and a sponsoring church for some church plants. Are you two able to kind of pay that forward in some ways to younger pastors, or not even just younger, but maybe a new pastor he became a pastor later in life or something like that?
We have sought those out.
We'd
You
like to
know,
do more, I think.
yeah,
And
our church plant, I really met quite a bit with Shane Caldwell and just tried to be an encouragement to him, and there's several others along those same lines. And I'm actually doing some stuff now with a group.
cohort.
Yeah, it's called Overseeds, and so their objective is to try to get individuals who've been in the pastorate for less than a decade and get them connected with the old guys like me. And so I meet with a small group along those lines in our areas, and that goes across lots of denominational lines and that kind of aspects, and then and just trying to make myself available, as I can, and sometimes those have worked out really well, and sometimes it's not.
Mhm.
There are sometimes these litmus tests that put on you that. So anyways, I don't want to get too much
Oh,
off.
I'd like to explore that.
No, anyways, but
Well, and I've had opportunities to just not as much as I'd like, really. I know Sandy's working with Baptist Convention New England and providing some future opportunities to sort of revive maybe some formal meetings among ministry wives. I've been part of some workshops with worship conferences that have been regional outside our convention, and just talking about ministry for the long haul. And that's kind of a passion, but and then just I think reaching through in pouring into or initiating relationships with some young women in our church who are considering full-time ministry or possibly being married to
just maybe a symptom of this, Robbie, is like 3 of the people we have on our staff now grew up at Hope Chapel. It's their roots, and so
they had an up close seat, and they maybe more than
they
you
still
realized,
came back.
yeah, maybe more than you realized. You both are being watched.
Yeah.
And
I do think that's important for us to look at. So, and there's where so some of the things that really helped us get through these difficult moments, and one of these may seem really strange, but is we always took the time to make sure that we had time to play, to play hard, and
What do you mean by that, Neal?
well, I mean, we've had some.
I was gonna
Elaborate.
We've had some opportunity because of family in the area. My grandparents had a lake cabin, and which eventually stayed in the family. And so we had a lot of weekends where we could take off. And when Christina was working full time, it was much more compressed because now we take Friday and Saturdays off. But back then, she'd get out of work on Fridays and we would head north and we'd spend all day Saturday just swimming and all that kind of stuff. And I remember one time having a pastor up with his family to the lake. You would know them, but I'm not going to use their name. And it's like 4:00 on Saturday afternoon. We were kind of wrapping up to get ready to have like an early dinner so we could all go back and do our churches the next morning.
Right.
And I'm sitting out on the raft with him, and he says to me, he said, I haven't done this in forever.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, how do you decompress, right? And there's ways in which, and so I think making sure that we take the time to do the stuff that allows us to decompress, allow us to have some fun.
Not church related.
Yeah, those kinds of things. And it's really important. And not everybody's going to have access to family who has a lake house and all that kind of stuff. I get all of that. But there's still other ways you can do that.
Public beaches and
one of the things we have to fight again, and we may talk about this some more next time, is that so in this idea of playing hard, it just allows you to get a lot of energy out or whatever. It feels like you feel better after you exercise. You just feel some ways once you've taken some time for yourself and enjoyed yourself, you're just more ready to handle the stresses of everything. And I will tell you, I think that too often as pastors, we are inclined to think, unless we're fatigued, we're not faithful.
Oh my.
And that is,
say that again.
That if we're not fatigued, if we're not just worn out and burned out, we haven't really been.
We must not be really serving hard.
That's such a lie.
And it is a lie.
Yeah.
Talk about that some.
We had a couple we got very close to. They were very gracious to us. He was on the staff with us at the church in Texas, and he went to another church, right? And down in the Houston area. And the expectations of this church was that, if the doors are open, the staff is there.
And his wife probably.
So I remember Christina talking to him like a half a dozen years after we left, and he was down there. And he was telling Christina a little bit about the dynamic he was in. And he said one time he got up from the kitchen table just to go to the refrigerator to get some milk. And as soon as he got up, his daughter said, "Good night, Daddy." Like
he was going out again.
He was gone, and he was going to be gone all night. And because that's the way they lived. And it's like we need to take the time. And I realize guys are bivocational.
Oh man!
And so you end up trying to do
church
stuff. Yeah, you try to do church stuff on Saturdays, breakfasts, and this and that, or whatever. But somewhere in there, whether it's every other Saturday, whether you've got to find some time just to get out.
You've got to fight to carve it out and actually schedule it.
Yeah,
and
just get out and play.
And some of the other examples of play that we owned motorcycles for several years. Both of us each had. He had one, and I rode behind him. I'm like, I think I want my own. And so so we did some, and so we took some trips, and we thankfully were able to get childcare overnight for our kids, and so. But we did it. We played tennis. We did lots of walks. We had
that's not always good for your marriage to play tennis.
It wasn't sometimes, but I kind of got over myself there after. But we had some old snowmobiles too, and just kind of did stuff like that.
But we also had let each other go play, meaning that I love to play golf, and that's a half a day experience, right?
Fine, I'm here good on the patio with my book and
tea. Then she likes to. She teaches a lot of piano students, so it's like, hey, I want to go to their play this afternoon at the school or whatever. And but you do some of that stuff that you just enjoy, and we need to let ourselves do that. If not, the only thing we're ever going to feel is the wind and the rain.
I wouldn't recommend separate vacations, with some we've seen also, but to do those together.
Here's another thing, and we deal with this a lot in marriage. I mean, Robby, you probably can resonate with this, but when you get under stress, right? We're not our ideal selves, right? And so we can get a little frustrated and short and those kinds of things. And one of the things that happens in those moments is that something that's supposed to be a gift to us, we can start to see it as a problem. And what I mean by that is that, the way she sees life, the way she saw parenting, the way she sees some relationship dynamics, and those is very different than the way I see it. And when we're in more normal times, it's like, this is a wonderful gift, right? We have this 360-degree perspective, but sometimes we get into those stressful moments, and now it's like, this is a problem. You just need to see it my way.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those times where you just really need to take a deep breath and say, I really value the fact that they see this differently. One of the things I love to joke about, put it this way, is that so when we were raising our boys, especially when they were younger, right? I used to tell people, like, if it wasn't for me, our kids would have no fun. And then because
not true,
but Christina was very cautious about stuff. But I'd also turn around and say, but if it wasn't for her, our kids probably wouldn't have lived. Because
one time I was in the living room and I saw one go from the ceiling off the ceiling and into a snowbank.
They were on the roof. We were shoveling the snow.
We had a lot of snow that winter.
I mean, from the edge of the roof to the snowbank was like 18 inches. So it wasn't like they were taking a life plunge, but still.
And this was obviously you have parenting seasons and you have small children, and then there have been times when he's gone off the rails, not off the rails. That's way too negative. But he's been, you're grounded for 3 months, and then I'm like, come on, not in front of the kids, but with later. Or when I one time, like, I don't even know what my deal was, went just completely nutty because one son, I had prepared this meal. I'm not that great a cook, or especially wasn't the time. Took Italian dressing and just put it all over everything, and I just like had a fit. And he's like, Christina, come on, this is it really worth it?
I was actually trying to keep from laughing.
And then
but
it diffused the situation.
But again, so one of these things is when you're in these stress moments, you just really need to discipline yourself to say, the fact that they see this differently than me, the fact that they want to handle this differently than me, you just really have to see that as a gift, because sometimes option A and option B aren't the best ones. But if you will, in a high trust environment like marriage, if you'll just work through it, you come up with option C, and usually option C is a whole lot better than A and B. And so really kind of translating what we believe into real practice in those moments.
So that's actually integrity right there.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But just knowing it's like, all right, the differences right now aren't. This isn't making it harder. This is actually trying to help make it easier. And just having that perspective on it is really, really important.
We didn't have that from the very beginning, and that was something we really, I'd say more in the last third of our marriage that we've really, for example, he and I process gray areas very, very differently. And for example, he's very, very much an external processor that can live with a multitude of chaos. And his motto is, well, we'll just figure it out when we cross that road. And I'm like, no, let's figure this out and draw a conclusion now. But he wants to keep his options open. But you know what? 8 times out of 10, he has the option that has come along, or the situation diffused or became less of what we thought it really was, because we waited and didn't rush into a conclusion. And I've just really grown to appreciate that, as frustrating it was in the moment.
So that's true. So learning how to embrace that and is really appreciated about your marriage, right? I mean, is the way that we thrive in marriage is different, and we need to value those differences. And in those stressful moments, we need to continue to honor those differences, right? Not just saying, I can't give that to you right now or whatever, but we try to honor all that.
Yeah.
It's true with our parenting. And Robby, as you know, parenting doesn't stop when your kids move out, and it goes on, and you continue to work on that. And then, even in your ministry scenarios and with your extended family, and it just goes right on down through the line. There's just seeing those in those moments, not as a problem, but seeing it as a gift is really helpful for marriage. And so, playing hard is one, and valuing those differences and utilizing them so you come up with better solutions and pathways forwards. And the last thing I'd say is that we tried in good ways to integrate family and ministry, meaning that, when I was at the BCNE, when the boys would get their baseball schedules or whatever, those were the first things that went on my calendar. Mm-hmm. And I tried to do whatever I could to protect it. And then when there were times when I was traveling overnight for the BCNE, I had to go somewhere to do a conference in New Hampshire or Maine or Vermont or whatever. If I could take one of the boys along with me because they were going to have childcare, I'd bring them along.
One time we went camping up in Lake Champlain area, and we took a tent. I hate tenting anyway, but it was really, really fun. And we actually had an old boat that we put on the lake.
And we also went in the Connecticut River.
And then the Connecticut River is part of that. And that was just so fun. But it was all linked to, conference he was doing.
But even when we're going to have 900 volunteers here this summer to build this building. And back when we built in 2005, we had almost 500. And, and so, they they cook meals on site. We put up a tent. We have to build a temporary kitchen, all that kind of stuff. And our boys loved coming over for lunch.
I told you I wasn't the greatest cook.
And so, just and letting them be a part of that experience and enjoying
really
it
memorable
and kind of get loved on. And you can just kind of run through a lot of those. I mean, my early days at the BCNE, I used to do what was the earlier version of Crosswalk, and it was called Centrifuge. And I was like the administrator. I'd take the boys, and they'd be on campus with me through the week, and enjoyed that kind of stuff. And so just trying to involve your family in the good rhythms of ministry, not just sit still, be quiet, don't make noise during the service.
And really, one of my early prayers was, Lord, please don't let our kids hate church because of their experience here. And so, and even just protecting nights that weren't just for us even were super helpful. There's the date night. We didn't have a formal structure. We have this every quarter, but we did take on a bigger scale every anniversary. We did some pretty significant trips, and at least one overnight on a regular anniversary. But on the fives, we did
bigger trips,
lots of trips abroad, but even just on the week to week basis. Friday night was kind of understood as our time together after the kids went to bed. Just we just had that regular rhythm that was an expectation in our marriage.
Yeah, and so
still is.
Anyway, it's again.
Don't call us on Friday nights. So, yeah.
No, the stresses come, right? They're going to come, and they're going to come from good things, and sometimes they're going to come from difficult things. And some of the stuff is outside of your control. I mean, I like to get up. I've done a lot of well-planned weddings, but I've never had somebody schedule their funeral 6 months in advance. I mean, they just, and we've had seasons here, like one Christmas we did 3 funerals in the 7 days before Christmas, and so those are just really draining times, and
so hard.
And you just need to be ready for those regularly, and we want to talk more about how you do that next time, so that when you have to sprint up the hill, you've got the energy to do it.
Yes.
But when you're going through those and you're starting to really huff and puff, there's just these things where you really want to be in a position where you're leaning on each other, valuing the perspectives that go with it. You make sure you've taken the time to recharge, so you're never too drained. You're playing, and then with that, you're in it together.
Hydrated.
Yeah, you're in it together as a family.
I like that word.
Yeah. And but so, anyways, next time we'd like to talk a lot more about how we invest in our marriage over the long haul.
Yeah, a couple of things that have stood out to me, and as I've heard you both talk, be it stresses, be it the things you guys have done proactively, the mentors, mentorees, it is a sense of that there's seasons, there's rhythms, not just there's big seasons in our life in terms of marriage, in terms of parenting, in terms of career, ministry, whatever, track we're on. And now you're entering a new season. And I think you've learned throughout every one of those seasons, and that sort of becomes a collective kind of thing. But I'm more interested to hear a little bit more about, as you guys have made decisions about family this, or this is how we're going to do ministry, this is how we're going to do vacation, and we have these differences in terms of our personality, our wiring. How do you guys get advice? How do you, in terms of decisions, the Bible talks a lot in Proverbs about getting wise counsel. And so I'd be curious next time just how some of these mentors and others in your life have kind of, because say a family, they're in their 30s and they have a career change, and all of a sudden they're going to be pastoring a church in rural Maine or even suburban, Massachusetts.
Right.
And there's a lot of skills to learn, but there's some character things and how to live in that role that as either you've defined yourself or others have defined for you, and you're trying to navigate that.
Yeah.
Just how decision making and growing in your decision making and just wisdom over the years, because I think I would certainly say that you guys have developed wisdom over the years. It's evidence and a lot of things that God has allowed you to do and you guys have chosen to do and have kind of fertilized your marriage and your parenting and those things. And
Yeah.
you're not the same couple that, moved to the South Shore when right after, and you're not the same couple that were
Why
in
not?
North Texas or in Sudbury.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
And
those would be a
yeah.
couple of areas as you guys talk about, because I think you're going to talk a little bit more about building in some stuff. So helping people know how to kind of take that from here and go, oh, okay, here's a couple of things that might be a good start or a next
Yeah.
step.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's what we plan to do.
Would love to do that.
But
I
let
have
me
to think
close.
about that before we.
Maybe
Yeah.
let me close with this thought related to the subject we're talking about today is that, a long time ago, I remember leading a Bible study at the church in Hanover. Of course, we had it was a midweek Bible study in the morning. So for the most part, there were a couple of older ladies who were in the Bible study, and then some younger moms who had kids at home, and for the most part, just me. Occasionally, there'd be another guy there, and I remember one of the moms saying to me that she had heard something on a Christian radio station, and the statement was this. It said off, that frustration is the product of expectations.
Huh.
And a lot of it was in the context of what do you actually expect to accomplish in a day when you have preschoolers right there? You're not going to be able to. It's because they create mess and havoc and it's whatever.
Absolutely.
Those kind of things. But when you apply that principle across the board, including to marriage and ministry, if we have these expectations that it's never going to be hard, it's always going to be easy.
Your family has to be perfect.
Everything's going to grow. Those kinds of
Right.
things. We're going to be frustrated, and that's not going to really be good.
No.
Can we do that in our relationship with the Lord? And maybe that's
Sure.
I don't know which one comes first, the chicken or the egg there, but
It
have
could be
expectations. If we're serving, God will certainly do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of this is as we deal with the difficulties that are going to come, and some of those comes from good things in our
Right.
lives.
Pressures.
The stresses that come from that. If we have appropriate expectations, it'll lower our frustration, and it gets us through it in a healthier way.
Yeah.
And there's ways to work on that and invest in your marriage and be ready to really lean on each other at the right moments.
And those
kinds of
expectations
things.
really can be. We need to divide and see what are biblical expectations of
Mhm.
me as a child of God, as a daughter of the Lord, and then as called into vocational ministry. What does the Bible say about what church really means and what it is?
Mhm.
And I did a deep dive in 1st and 2nd Corinthians this past summer, and just reshaping expectations and dividing what is man-made, contrived, culturally, shaped expectations, and what will really please the Lord,
Mhm.
and what will really grow His church.
Yeah.
And so those are hard questions that need to continually be asked.
So we probably need to wrap this segment up. I think we're probably at our 45-minute limit here. So,
Yeah.
but we look forward to next time around. So,
I do too.
we don't have all the answers.
Right.
I encourage young couples. I encourage every marriage to read or do some kind of a video series or something every year. But what I tell them up front is the answers to your problems are not in this book, right? They're not in this video conference. And, but marriage is such a unique relationship. You need your own terminology and language to be able to talk about it. I mean, we have lived together now as husband and wife for 40 years. That's way longer than I live with my parents or my siblings or anybody else. And my future, my finances, my everything is wrapped up in the journey that I have with her.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely unique journey, and you need some language to be able to talk about that as you go
Yes.
through. And we'll talk a little bit about that next time.
I look forward to that.
Yeah.
All right.
That's
Us too.
exactly
Thank you
right.
for this opportunity.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Neal. And we'll do this again very soon.
Love
Thanks a
to.
lot, you guys.
Thanks for inviting us.
You're welcome. Thank you for being part of the Pastor's Heart, finding joy in ministry and marriage.